Hi, it's Tiffany Johannes with Remax Executive and Charlotte Home Experts, here tonight to talk to Mark Dwyer with Innovative Home Inspections. Our topic is, what are the top 10 things you should do on a home inspection? There are a number of things that come up when you have a home inspection. Mark has been in the business for years. We actually met right after I got into the business, I think 13, 14 years ago, and he had been doing it for a while. So I thought he would be a great person to chat with tonight on what should you look for when you're getting ready to list your house in preparation for a home inspection once you go under contract.
Good evening, Tiffany. Thanks for having me speak tonight. And yeah, this is it, like you said, for me, I think it's been 16 years now. And the thing about home inspections is sometimes I think if you're selling a house, it's one of those things where you don't want to kind of see your warts. So I think it's probably easy to kind of want to pretend like some of the issues you may have don't exist, whether it be kind of on the nature of something that might need a little TLC and paint, up to maybe a significant issue you may have with a structural issue or a crawl space or a wet crawl space issue. So I think part of it is when you're getting ready to ready your home to sell is to kind of do an honest inventory of what sort of issues you have. When you're doing an inspection, the biggest variables are always the age of the house and kind of general maintenance of the house. And in reality, a house is a lot like a car. Everything kind of has a design service life. And if you're pretty diligent with your maintenance, then your components tend to last a little longer. And if you're not, then they tend not to. So certainly if you're in a position where you're getting ready to sell a house that might be 12 or 15 years old, that's not a house. It's not an old house by any means, but it's old enough that some of the things organically about it have just started to age. So I think that that's something that most, and certainly you could speak to this better than I could, Tiffany, most home buyers, at least savvy, experienced ones, that's something that's probably pretty high on their list about what things are they looking at when they're buying it, when they're buying a house, because that seems like probably an intelligent kind of experience question for somebody that owns a house to be asking. So from that perspective, if you wanted to be a savvy home seller, you would try to load yourself with kind of answers that they might have to those questions. So once again, from more of a macro level perspective, if I were selling a house, like I said, I would kind of do a large level inventory of, how my large affected things like HVAC systems, or if you have an older roof, maybe have somebody check that out. So once again, part of it is to really kind of know with what you're working with. If you have a 4-year-old house that's you're probably not going to be due for any significant maintenance, but it would certainly be a good idea to do some kind of routine maintenance that you probably should be doing annually, things like just basic maintenance on your HVAC systems. So to circle back what I was saying a second ago, if I were selling a house that I knew had an older HVAC system, I think it would certainly be worth the money that you would spend to have somebody proactively come out and inspect it, because like I said, that's a question they're going to have. And that's something, if the buyer or the realtor that was representing the buyer didn't kind of have that question before the home inspection, they're probably going to have the question after the home inspection. So in my experience, I've seen home sellers that kind of got those inspections done, had those services done, and then they even put it in a binder and then just laid it out on the kitchen table or whatever. And I just think that made everybody feel good. Plus, it just kind of keeps you out of a position where you're opening yourself up to another, HVAC inspector that's coming in to represent them that, like I said, they're probably going to be satisfied if you've hired a professional contractor and then you have that paperwork. And like I said, I think it answers a question that a lot of people are going to have, either
You're right. Definitely.
when they're making the offer or after the inspection. Yeah.
Yes, HVAC is one of the most important pieces when it comes to a home inspection. And when we're doing the property disclosures, it asks, what is the age of your HVAC system? And oftentimes people don't even realize how old their heating system is or their cooling system is, and might not have had it serviced or maintenance like a lot of people do seasonally. So that point of having the HVAC inspected and checked out if you don't seasonally have it maintained is a huge piece that can help save you money and save some anguish as you're going into a home inspection. I know you look at home systems every day from an HVAC perspective, and you're pointing out the average useful life of an HVAC is how old?
Normally, HVAC contractors would say 8 to 12 years. So that's generally what, what you're looking at. And in reality, that number is actually coming down a little bit, not going up, because, typical of most, that sort of product, the manufacturing has changed a little bit. And so the service life has gone down a little bit. So, like I said, to me, I've seen the reactions from home buyers on from both perspectives. And let's just assume that in both scenarios, it's a 16-year-old system. Well, I've been at an inspection where, the home buyers show up for a summary and they said, yeah, well, we were aware of that. We were expecting that. And
Yes.
And if you had something to document that it had been serviced, I think they would feel super comfortable. And I've also seen the scenario where they haven't they hadn't considered it, where it's never really been brought to their attention, and they almost were panicked by it a little bit. What does that mean? And does it work okay? And how long will it last? And it kind of, so with it being such a significant decision that people are considering, like I said, I think it's just beneficial to do that.
Well, HVAC is on the top of the list. What do you have as your number 2 thing that is a go-to for home inspections that someone could go ahead and check out ahead of time? That's one of the major systems.
Well, certainly, if you were just going to pick one component that was the most expensive thing to replace, assuming you didn't have some sort of, abnormal situation, would be your roof. So, but in reality, most people have a pretty good idea if their roof is working or not, because it leaks when it doesn't. But, if you had an older roof, it's worth a consideration to take a look at it. Certainly, at least to the extent to, make sure that it looks like it's well capped and it's clean and there's not a lot of debris. And while you're at it, clean the roof drainage systems, because, people just don't love cleaning gutters and they forget about doing it. So it's going to be something that's going to be brought to your attention when that home inspection comes. But like I said, you can't do much to kind of service your roof, but, just have an awareness once again of kind of the generality of if your roof is 20 years old, that's going to be brought to the attention of the home buyers. But have an idea, look in your attic. I think particularly in this area where the majority of people have a home that has both an attic that people seldom go in or never go in, and a crawl space that people seldom, if ever, go in. So from one perspective, to answer your second thing is, look in your attic if you haven't gone in there. If you're unlucky, you could see that there's been some stains and leaks and that sort of thing. But once again, you'd rather find that out before you had your house on the market or before you were under contract, because it just gives you more of an opportunity to have somebody look into it and correct it. You don't want a bunch of undiscovered things coming up in a home inspection. That just, naturally isn't the best scenario.
You're right. And oftentimes I see people doing a roof tune-up or having someone come out and just check to make sure that there's no nail pops or there's nothing flashing wise that needs to be reattached, or roof caulking and sealant provided. So those are some of the things that I see some people doing ahead of time. And I know as you look on the roofs, oftentimes there's some of the same things that pop up. So I think roofs are definitely number 2. You mentioned crawl spaces. Crawl spaces is something, if you have a crawl space in the area, it means that you have an underneath of your house. If you have a slab, that's a whole different story. But a crawl space is something hardly anyone goes in on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah, and it's good job security for home inspectors, because It's one thing that you just hear all the time is I could never do that, or I wouldn't want to do it or anything. And yeah, absolutely. And realistically, you could probably number these in any order, but the same. So obviously there's a difference in between the way that I would look at or evaluate a crawl space versus a layperson that just doesn't have experience. But I can tell you, if you have a problematic crawl space, most people could tell. You wouldn't need to be a general contractor to know that it's problematic. Now, it's like anything else. Sometimes you get a little where it's a gray area, or it's a crawl space that might have kind of seasonally bad issues. But I would say, once again, if you haven't been in your crawl space or don't regularly inspect or do any maintenance in your crawl space, go check it out. And I know most people in crawl spaces vary a lot, and there's a lot that I don't want to go into. I go into them, but I don't want to. So, if your crawl space is pretty easy to get around, then just get a nice bright flashlight and take a poke around. And you're just looking for things like water intrusion, if there's any standing water, or if there's any sort of, dampness, whether it be standing water or just, fungal growth on the floor system, or, like I said, most people, you could look and kind of have an idea if the area has been damp or not. And then most people would know if you've got one that's, significantly. And if that's not something that you're on board with, then I don't blame you. That probably makes you most people, and that probably proves your sanity, because that's, like I said, of course, every home inspector hates doing crawl spaces, but it is what it is. Yeah. So, and if you're not comfortable with it, find somebody that's comfortable with it, or hire somebody to do it. But, like I said, I know it's certainly something that most people just don't spend much time in their crawl space. And a crawl space is something that, if you've got a broken window, everybody understands what that means. And worst case scenario, you can have somebody fix it in 2 weeks for, in the amount of money you spend to fix it, it's going to be the amount of money they told you it would be. Crawl spaces, they can be complicated. They can be difficult to correct. Procedurally, there's a lot of both time and materials that go into it. And for those people that face that kind of, more of a worst case scenario, you would, once again, you'd rather have time as your friend when you're dealing with that. What would be more difficult, and it's something I don't see like you do, Tiffany, is when people have to respond within their due diligence period and all of those things, to kind of make things happen, to get the right contractors involved, and, start to provide answers to questions people have.
Yes, because if your crawl space is damp or wet, you could see rot issues, you could see termites. There are a number of things that can happen in your crawl space that you can deflect and figure out a solution to prior to listing your house or having a home inspection, or even having your house pre-inspected by a home inspector is another option. As we move forward, what would you say is your number 4, Mark?
You know what? Probably by the percentages, the most issues a home inspector would find on a house are exterior issues, because naturally it's what gets the most exposure. You and I have gone through so many inspections over the years. That one thing that continually gets brought up is like wood damage around, exterior door trims and thresholds, deterioration around windows, those sorts of things.
Missing
part
caulk.
Of it's naturally, missing caulk. So in a lot of those things, naturally a homeowner could do if they were inclined to do it, if they were either interested and handy or just trying to save a little money before they put their house on the market. It's, some things are, I think most people probably have things that are on their list somewhere that they're aware of. Right. Some people have a broken drawer, but you can still use it if you pick it up by the bottom edge of the drawer, and that drawer, that's the way the drawer is until they ultimately move or for eternity. So I think part of it is to kind of do, kind of an official list where you start to actually write down the things that exist, and then make a list of what those things are, and they'll accumulate once you kind of spend time, because there's things it's easy to look past a little wood deterioration at the bottom of your wood, your jambs on your door, because who cares? But what you would find is, particularly once again, if you have an older home and it has a siding that's a little bit more sensitive to, deterioration, if you've got a lot of wood trim or you've got wood siding or something like that, then you're just going to be more vulnerable to have those things. And then once again, there are things that you can fix ahead of time. I think ideally, in probably anybody's list, preferably you'd have a shorter list than a longer list. And that, sometimes you can have a short list that has big problems, but overall, I think anything that you can kind of do just to reduce the number of things, I think it just makes things go smoother for everybody. And B, you probably would end up saving money just in the opportunity to fix things kind of for yourself if you wanted to. And C, it just, I think everybody kind of wants to buy a house from a super conscientious homeowner. So you would just assume that list be shorter. Not that it matters. I mean, I'm sure there are people that's not important to. And then other people, that's all they talk about when they're at the house is, how excited that they are to be buying this house from this person that seems to be so meticulous. So.
Right. And you're right about that. As we all have different personalities, there are different personalities in home buying, and everyone has something that's different that's important to them and their perception of things. So having that list as small as possible is very key. As we look to the next piece, would you say windows would be, or plumbing? Which one would you go for?
I'm sorry, Tiffany, I've actually lost my sound, so I'm trying to reconnect.
Okay. Tell me when you can hear me. While Mark's putting on his sound, I would bet his number 5 would probably be windows. And oftentimes, as we're going through the process of the home inspection, there are going to be window issues. Some of the window issues I hear Mark talk about are issues with them opening and closing. Most of the time in our area, we do not open and close our windows. So that's something to think about, and to check your windows. And once you open them, making sure that they stay up and don't fall back down. Make sure you can latch them and connect them. Those are just some of the things that you should think about from a window perspective. Other pieces are broken thermal cells. And when Mark regains his sound, he will tell you broken thermal cells are something he sees all of the time. Sometimes we can tell because that's when you start seeing a blurry feel in the window. But oftentimes it starts before you can see that blur, and you can see air bubbles or droplets in between the panes. And that's a broken thermal cell. That's one of the top things that we see on inspection reports. Mark, are you back yet? Okay, I don't hear Mark coming back quite yet, so I will go on. So after windows, probably the next thing I see a lot of are things relative to your plumbing. Some things that you can check around the house are, how are your toilets? Are they moving? Mark and we joke around all the time. Can you hear?
I still don't have any sound. I'm sorry, Tiffany.
That's okay. I'll keep going while he's done. So toilets. Oftentimes home inspectors, and Mark does this all the time, and we get a good laugh out of it. They check your toilets rocking back and forth and side to side. If you have an issue, it could be a need to replace your wax seal around your toilet, or you might just need to shim it up. So check out your toilet. Make sure your toilets are flushing and the water's doing exactly what you expect it to do when you flush your toilet, and the water's coming back in. As we look at other things from a plumbing perspective, do you have any drains that drain slow? Mark finds drains that drain slow all the time. We also see hot and cold water reverse. So from a plumbing perspective, those are some of the things that you probably should think of. Mark, are you back?
I'm back, but it's not through my AirPods, so you might get some.
Okay, we'll be good. So while you were working on your sound, I talked to them a little bit about windows and the things that you should consider with windows, everything from broken thermal cells, opening and closing your windows, latching them, making sure they stay up. I talked a little bit about plumbing, and I started talking about how you love to rock back and forth on toilets.
Yeah.
And that seems to be number one piece, and slow drains.
Yeah.
if you want to pick it up from there, those are the things I was talking about as you're working on the sound.
Right. So I apologize for that. I still don't. Unfortunately, some of my tech skills aren't up to par.
No worries.
So, once again, if you wanted to perform kind of a semi home inspection, one thing that home inspectors do is we do functional flow in bathrooms. So yeah, you mentioned a few things that are the most popular common things that we come up with, and definitely. So, you could, once again, I liked your idea. Most people in this area, I don't know if most, but certainly a lot of people don't really open and close their windows. So you would probably be surprised if you went just room to room, door to door, and just matriculated all the way around the house. You would probably find that you had a few windows that didn't open or close, or, a couple with broken thermal seals. So, once again, depending on, how you value those things. If you've got an older home and you've got a few broken thermal seals, but the nature of the home is it's an older home, then obviously it wouldn't be much of a priority to correct those things. But in a bathroom, what we do is we go into each bathroom and you run all the fixtures at the same time. So it can give you an idea of that your functional flow is okay, because if everything is operating okay, then your sinks won't be filling up. They'll be emptying at essentially the same rate that they're going in there. So go and turn all your fixtures on at the same time, check underneath your sinks. That you might find, most people obviously store a lot of things underneath their bathroom sinks. So sometimes when you're poking around as an inspector, you find that there's wet areas that, you wouldn't even, you don't know just by opening the door, but when you poke around a little. So, run all your fixtures at the same time, just to make sure that nothing's clogged, because it's a common thing. So, and it also, you could characterize it as something that most homeowners could just do to correct themselves. So, I think when I lost you, we were talking about the exterior. So same, make a lap around your house. Just look up and down, side to side, and just take a little sheet with you and make notes. And so little areas of wood deterioration and paint, those are certainly all things a homeowner can do just to, from a home inspection perspective, but obviously just from an appearance perspective. I mean, if you're putting the house on the market, why not address those things before you have the home inspection? So go through the inside of the house. Naturally, most people are going to have circuit testers, but you know what? For that sort of things, you wouldn't expect to find a lot of, issues with your electrical system and stuff on a newer home. If you're selling an older home, then that's a different ball game. So you could make probably this conversation pretty wide just based on the generality of how old of a home we were talking about. But once again, if you were selling a house maybe from the 1950s or 1960s, then certainly it opens up a lot of other issues that you could run into, and in terms of maybe needing to get other contractors involved and stuff. It just kind of depends on how you wanted to manage it from the real estate sale of it. But yeah,
definitely.
I guess I've been looking at it through a little bit more of a narrow lens of, houses that, naturally in Charlotte, from a percentage wise, there's probably the lion's share of them are, newer than 30 or 40 years old because of the, the amount of growth that we've had in the last 30 or 40 years. But but I go all over the region and I see everything from houses that are a couple hundred years old out in Waxhaw to, naturally pretty interesting looking uptown condos. So, and everything in between.
That is definitely the case. And I think one of the things that homeowners can easily do from an electrical standpoint is replace light bulbs that are out. Or if you've taken a light bulb out of a flood light or something like that, go ahead and replace it before you go on the market or before you have your home inspection. Because the last thing anyone wants to see is probably it's the light bulb, but have it checked out by a general contractor or a licensed electrician. So,
you almost you want to basically create two lists: a list of things that you think that you could fix yourself, and then a list of things that you think are worthwhile to bring a person out, a professional out to fix before you put your house in the market. Like I said, we're not going to get into a conversation about, should you get a home inspection or not. Like I said, naturally, I think that honestly, I would tell anybody that, yeah, it's worth getting a pre-listing inspection, just because my experience tells me it's worth it, because I've seen, people in both situations where, they became aware of things that they didn't know about before they listed their house, and then they were able to get 2 or 3 different estimates from contractors, and that makes a difference. It's tough to be under the gun making those sorts of decisions, because most people don't have, I'll use a really outdated, a Rolodex of contacts where they can say, well, I need to get, who's my trusty plumber? It feels like people maybe back in the 1950s had a little bit more of that. They knew a plumber and they knew a roofer, but honestly, I just think that people in general don't have that sort of context, where they can have access to that sort of relationships with contractors. So with that being said, naturally, it serves you better if you can reach out to a realtor that has those contacts, or, be able to do a little research and do some interviews and stuff. So
that's definitely the case. Is you're getting ready to prepare your home for the market, whether you're thinking about it today or thinking about it 3 years from now. Those to-do lists that you're thinking, one day I'll get to that, one day I will get to that. I suggest maybe once every 6 months or once a quarter, getting a couple of those things off the list. So when you get ready to sell, some of those things that are going on with your house are taken care of. Some of us just get used to living with something and don't even think about it. Then when it comes up on the report, we say, it's been like that for 10 years.
Right.
Well, just because it's been like that for 10 years doesn't mean it's functioning as intended, which is one of Mark's favorite sayings, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that harkens back to our licensure board. That's one of our edicts, is how we're measuring things, are things functioning as intended? And then most experienced realtors learn that along the way. And so they ask that question. If I ever alluded to a water heater being old, certainly there's plenty of realtors who would say, but is it functioning as intended? It's just one of those things that's in our little world that we live in. But yeah.
I mean, as a home inspector, you brought up a good point. You guys are licensed and bonded by the state in which you do inspections. Tell me a little bit about home inspectors and what they have to do and what's required, and how you became a home inspector, because I think a lot of people aren't really sure and don't even realize that you guys are licensed and have to go through continuing education and do a lot of the same things that we do as realtors.
Absolutely. So correct, both states are licensure states. I'm not sure what the actual number out of across the country is, but I think it's something like 38 out of the 50 states are licensure states. So that means that, we have just like your real estate association, we have a licensure board and standards of practice and rules and regulations, which include having ongoing education. The home inspection license in itself it's difficult. I think that probably the way that people think about home inspectors is a little different than it was 10 years ago, but certainly than it was 20 or 30 years ago. For myself, I actually did kind of more white collar consulting. I always enjoyed construction, and I've had, you name it, every sort of construction job on a job site from the time I was a kid. And even when I was in college, I helped pay for school by starting a small construction company that basically we would go in and replace broken toilets and faucets and holes in drywall where students would punch a hole in the wall or anything. But I always just had a general interest in it, going back to my father. And then so I ended up I ended up going to actually all the way through grad school and did environmental consulting. But the path that it took me kind of combined my construction experience, because I did a lot of environmental consulting for large contractors. A lot of the scope of that work was kind of more geared to commercial side of work, but I was just had an interest in it. And even as kind of a hobbyist, I was always doing projects around the house and all that kind of stuff. So when I did enough of that kind of consulting where I got bored with it, I decided to shift into a different career. It kind of combined my practical experience and then my interest in just in a go for it, a job that I would enjoy doing. Myself, I ended up meeting a guy who, by the name of John Ring, who I think was the number 4 license in North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
He trained me for about a year, and then ultimately he had an interest in me buying out his company because he was getting older and he was wanting to retire. And I have experience with starting companies because that was part of some of the consulting work I had done. So I ended up just kind of creating my company 16 years ago. But the testing of it's pretty difficult because I know real estate, it covers a lot of different, from, the legalese part of it to practical day in and day out, how you manage your business. So home inspection is difficult and interesting because one day, I mentioned it earlier, you could be inspecting a house that was built in 1925, and that's just a completely different animal than inspecting the house that I did this afternoon, which was a 2018 monolithic slab. I mean, they're just different in nature. It's part of what makes the job interesting because it's not the same thing all the time. But yeah, I think most home inspectors that I know, I think I feel good about. That's the good news. I think at one point people probably didn't think about it as being very professional. They thought about it as, just tradespeople that happen to do construction. That, and probably naturally, that was from the beginning. It was more people that were tradespeople that just decided to do it. But I find that there's people from every background that are home inspectors now. But
that's great. And I always love when I hear you say, I'm more of a generalist. When you think of a diagnosis, I'm going to give you the information that you need to go to a specialist. And you guys, while you don't do code inspections, you're very detailed and you provide a lot of information about a home that I don't even think the homeowner realized they had in their house. By the time you look at your report, it's very picture intensive, has lots of details and information on just items and how old they are, what their serial numbers are, part numbers, model numbers, and you just give a lot of valuable information and insight. We often will come at the end of your inspection, if I have the buyer, and you'll walk through the home. And what I've always liked about what Mark does from an inspection standpoint is he can share in layman's terms what's going on with the house and what to be concerned with, maybe what not to be so much concerned with. And you have the details, you have the pictures, you can walk around and look to see what he's seen in that inspection. And depending on the age of the home, how big the home is, if it's on a slab or a crawl space, this takes a different amount of time to inspect it. But Mark does a fabulous job, and that's why I asked him to come on tonight and really talk about what are the top 10 things and the top things that you need to consider if you are buying or selling a home. And while we labeled this for sellers, buyers certainly would get a lot out of this information because it's things to think about if you're buying a home or you haven't bought a home in a while. And oftentimes sellers are going to be buying another house. And so it's always interesting to see the seller's inspection report and the house they're buying's inspection report. And oftentimes you're juggling two at the same time as a realtor if you have someone who's buying and selling. And Mark's always very clear and always offers to answer any questions. And I have lots of clients that have gone back and asked a lot of questions over the years, and he always gets that thumbs up from them saying he's done a great job. So, Mark, I appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk through the inspection, tell us a little bit about home inspectors, and give us those top 10 things to look out for. And of course, we talked about the roof, the crawl space, the windows, easy things you can do with the electrical, plumbing, HVAC system. The list
Yeah.
goes on, but I feel like we really hit the top items. Is there anything else you want to add before we see if there are any questions? And I've also put a note down if anyone has any follow-up questions, that we'd be happy to answer them offline as well, of course.
Absolutely. No, I mean, once again, I think a part of it is to kind of face reality in terms of, most people, I think there's plenty of things that they know are kind of going on with their house, but they just, you just don't want to think about it because you don't want to deal with it. So, just create a list and deal with the things, and it's better just to do it on your time and everything. Tiffany, I love to talk about houses and I love to talk about home inspections, so I'd be happy to do this anytime with you. And one of the things I always appreciate about working with you is that you're always trying to get better and improve your knowledge base, and you never stop, and that's very commendable. So yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or like you said, if anybody has any questions after the fact, whatever I can do to try to help your process a little better. The good news is, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about selling your house, I would think it's a fantastic time to sell your house, because that's all I hear about. People trying to buy houses and the difficulty with, with getting their hands on good houses. So yeah, you're probably in the catbird seat if you're even listening to this, because you're thinking about putting your house on the market.
Yes, and from a home inspection standpoint, once Mark gets done with the inspection, whether your realtor is representing you as a buyer or seller, they're going to guide you and counsel you through the process, because just because Mark put all that stuff on the report doesn't mean that the seller has to fix it, and doesn't mean that the buyer has to move forward either. So there are lots of different alternatives and paths that you can go down once you have that home inspection. It's just part of your due diligence process. And so if you have been thinking about selling your home and would like a free report on things to consider and look at from a home inspection standpoint, or just getting your house ready to list, we're happy to send it to you. Either private message us or put it in the links below. We'd be happy to do that. And if there are any questions for Mark, I will definitely pass it along, and we will connect and engage with you one-on-one to make sure that we get those questions answered. Mark, I really appreciate you being with us tonight. And thank you for your time. Innovative Home Inspections has, he said, been in business for 16 years. He has done thousands upon thousands of home inspections over the years. And I really appreciated the opportunity to work with him. And my buyers have had much success in working with him. So thank you. And
thank you, Tiffany. Have a great night.
You're welcome. Thanks. Are there any questions, Adela? I think we are good. So I appreciate your time tonight. Again, I'm Tiffany Johannes with RE/MAX Executive and Charlotte Home Experts, and I'm here tonight with Mark Dwyer with Innovative Home Inspections. Thank you for your time, and hope you guys have a great one. Thanks.